Picture this. It's a gorgeous, sunny Sunday afternoon in July 1922. You're at a crowded beach in Chicago, enjoying the breeze. You've finally summoned the courage to step out in one of those new, slightly shorter-fitted swimming suits. Suddenly, a stern man wearing a dark wool suit and a bowler hat approaches you on the sand. Is he checking you out? No. He's reaching into his pocket for a yellow tape measure. He kneels down right at your feet to measure the exact distance from your kneecap to the hemline of your bathing suit. If it's more than 6 inches above your knee, you aren't just embarrassed. You are immediately placed under arrest, escorted off the beach in handcuffs, and thrown into a police wagon. This isn't a dystopian movie script. It was real life. Throughout human history, governments, kings, emperors, and religious authorities have been deeply obsessed with one specific thing: what women were wearing on their bodies. If you think today's high school or office dress codes are annoying, wait until you hear about the laws that made a woman's hair the legal property of her husband, created specialized police squads to raid women's closets, or required an official government permit just to put on a pair of trousers. For the next few minutes, we are pulling back the curtain on the wildest, most controlling, and downright absurd fashion laws from history. We're asking why these laws existed, who they were really protecting, and how they reveal a deep-seated historical terror of women gaining actual independence. Buckle up, this isn't a lighthearted history of style. It's a history of power, surveillance, and control. Before we dive into specific laws, we have to talk about the granddaddy of all wardrobe surveillance: sumptuary laws. Think of sumptuary laws as the ultimate state-enforced class and gender dress codes. For thousands of years, stretching from ancient Greece through medieval Europe and Tokugawa Japan, these laws didn't just regulate modesty. They regulated wealth and status. The idea was simple. If you were a common farmer or peasant, you shouldn't be allowed to pretend to be a noble just because you saved up enough coin to buy silk or velvet. While sumptuary laws applied to everyone on paper, lawmakers had a special fixation on women. In medieval Florence, city councils became so obsessed with women circumventing clothing restrictions that they established an entire dedicated department, complete with paid inspectors, specifically to track down and fine women for excessive dress. Officials complained in public documents that women were constantly inventing clever new ways to hide forbidden embroidery or make their sleeves slightly wider. City elders genuinely believed women's fashion choices were going to bankrupt noble families and bring about moral collapse. In ancient Rome, social status was legally enforced by clothing. A respectable married Roman citizen woman wore a long garment called a stola. It was a sign of honor and protection. But if a woman was accused of unchastity or worked as a prostitute, she was legally forbidden from wearing the stola. Instead, she was forced by law to wear a man's toga in public. Her clothing became a mandatory scarlet letter, a state-mandated brand designed to invite public shaming wherever she walked. Let's zoom in on one of the most famous fashion battles in ancient history. Rome in the year 215 BCE. Rome was locked in a brutal war with Hannibal of Carthage. The treasury was completely drained. In desperation, the Roman government passed a temporary wartime emergency measure called the Lex Appia. The Lex Appia ruled that no Roman woman could own more than half an ounce of gold on her person. She was banned from wearing multicolored tunics, and she was strictly forbidden from riding in a horse-drawn carriage within a mile of any city unless attending an official religious ceremony. On the surface, it sounded like a reasonable sacrifice for the war effort. Except here's where the real story begins. The war eventually ended, Carthage was defeated, and vast wealth poured into Rome. The emergency was over. But when 20 years had passed, the men in the Roman Senate refused to repeal the Lex Appia. They liked having the legal right to cap their wives' spending and keep them visually modest. Roman women had had enough. In 195 BCE, they organized one of the earliest recorded public women's protests in Western history. Women gathered, flooded into the streets, and completely blocked the entrances to the Roman Forum, demanding the return of their right to wear their own gold and colorful fabrics. A famous conservative statesman named Cato the Elder stood up in the Senate and gave a furious speech against repealing the law. He warned his fellow men that if women were allowed to choose their own clothing, men would lose control of their households entirely. He argued that if women were made equal in their wardrobe, they would soon become superior in every other way. Cato claimed the law was necessary to prevent rivalry among women. But he was lying. It was about ensuring that women remained visibly and legally subservient to men. As societies moved into the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, fashion laws evolved into hyper-specific, remarkably strange local ordinances and property laws. Consider Paris, France, the fashion capital of the world. In November 1799, the Parisian police chief issued a legal decree that officially made it illegal for women to wear trousers or dress in male attire in public. If a French woman wanted to wear pants, she had to physically walk into a police station, present a medical excuse or practical reason, and apply for a formal police permit called a cross-dressing authorization. This wasn't just an 18th century rule. The law stayed on the books through 2 world wars and into the digital age. It wasn't until February 2013 that the French government officially revoked the ordinance, acknowledging that for over 200 years, any woman wearing jeans in Paris without a permit was technically committing a crime. While French law focused on public trousers, laws in other places targeted women's bodies inside the home, treating them directly as male property. In the state of Michigan, an old legal precedent established that a married woman's hair was literally the legal property of her husband. Because her hair was considered an asset belonging to her spouse, a woman did not have the autonomy to go to a salon and chop it off, dye it, or change her style without getting her husband's explicit permission first. The law prioritized a husband's visual preference over a woman's basic right to decide what happened to her own head. Of course, not all fashion controls came in written laws. Some were social customs so deeply entrenched that defying them meant social ruin. Nothing illustrates this better than the Victorian corset crisis. By the mid-1800s, fashion demanded an exaggerated hourglass silhouette. Achieving this look meant wearing heavy, steel-boned corsets laced so tightly that they reshaped internal organs, restricted lung capacity, and compressed ribs. It was common for women to faint at social gatherings simply because their lungs couldn't take in a full breath of air, a phenomenon male doctors dismissed as delicate, temperaments requiring fainting couches and smelling salts. When the early women's rights movement began fighting for the right to vote in the 1850s, activists realized a fundamental truth. Physical liberation and political liberation are inseparable. If your clothing is so tight that you can't walk a mile or breathe deeply, it is nearly impossible to organize rallies or fight for your legal rights. A reformer named Amelia Bloomer popularized a revolutionary new outfit. A modest skirt worn over loose, comfortable trousers gathered at the ankles. These pants quickly became known as bloomers. The public reaction was merciless. Women who wore bloomers in public were harassed in the streets, pelted with food, and mocked in newspapers. Political cartoonists portrayed bloomer-wearing women as aggressive monsters trying to overthrow society. Why the violent reaction over loose pants? Because men recognized what bloomers represented. A woman who could move freely was a woman who could no longer be easily controlled. When you look back at all these examples, from beach tape measures to Roman street protests and 200-year-old pant permits, a clear pattern emerges. It is easy to look at these old laws, laugh at their ridiculousness, and assume those days are over. But the core instinct behind these laws hasn't disappeared. It has simply shifted shape. We see it in strict high school dress codes, corporate workplaces mandating specific heel heights, and the pink tax charging women more for identical products. Fashion laws were never really about modesty, fabric conservation, or aesthetics. They were about visual control. When you dictate what a person can wear, you control where they can walk, how fast they can move, and how the world perceives them. History proves that fashion has never been just clothes. It has always been a battlefield for autonomy. What is the most absurd dress code or fashion expectation you've ever encountered? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into history eye-opening, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.